Hello, and welcome to another episode of Ask a Pianist. My name is Andrew Aarons, and today we'll be continuing our discussion about trills, this time tackling the most difficult issue of adding trills in unexpected places without an original source. In previous episodes, I talked about trill control and repeating trill options in similar musical situations that the composer has offered before. But now, we get to the really fun part, where we can experiment with ornaments that are purely selfish in origin and execution. The Allemande from Händel's D minor suite is relatively open for ornamentation. I'll play the work as written, in as neutral a way as I can, so that the form, harmony, and gestures are clear. This is without repeats. Given that both sections are expected to be repeated, we have an opportunity to beautify or shine a spotlight on moments that we feel are interesting when we play the repeats. First off, the opening anacrusis, as written, can accommodate a small trill in the middle. This serves the purpose of setting the beat pattern for the ear, and it is common to do this in Allemande dances. So, instead of this, we can do something like this. This gesture is one we can of course adopt when Händel starts the second half with the same gesture. Now, as we move on, the opening phrase has a written mordant on the long note at the end of the bar. This is important. Händel is comfortable accenting and extending this note, even though it's on a weak beat. This gives us allowance to do the same later on in the piece. In the second half, he gives us a long note in the right hand in the same rhythmic place, but without a mordant, and in a very different musical situation. Thus, we can add one here too. So far, our additions have been either historically motivated or derivative from the piece. Now, let's do something a little more far out. First, In a slow Allemande like this, all the gestures that are an anacrusis to a beat and move in scale-like fashion can accommodate additions of mordents or trills. This means not only the opening, but also places like this. Also, instead of this, we can do something like this. Anytime you have an appoggiatura on the main beat that resolves, a trill can be added to these as well, though sometimes it may sound good and sometimes it may sound awful. The opening phrase has this situation in the first bar. And a similar one in the second bar. I would only add a trill or a mordent in the second bar because it's actually a proper resolving cadence the second time. If I add one the first time, it would sound slightly out of place because the phrase is not ending here, but moving on. See what I mean? Ornaments tend to be added on strong beats, and almost never on weak beats. This is not limited to the strongest beat combinations in the piece. In other words, if the piece is written in common time, then the hierarchy of beat relations, from strongest to weakest, is 1, 3, 2, 4. If we clap it out, we get this. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's easy to put an ornament on beat 1 or beat 3. 1, 2, 3. And we should be careful putting them on 2 and 4. When these beats are subdivided, the principle stays the same. If a beat is divided into 2, so that we have 8 sections, then it's still better to put an ornament on beats 1, 3, 5, and 7, rather than 2, 4, 6, and 8. Because ornaments draw attention to the note they are on. They form a kind of rhythmic emphasis. So if they're ever used on a weak beat, it must be for a very specific musical purpose. If not, it sounds like a mistake. The first example was just such an event, where Händel himself placed a long mordent on beat 4, the weakest of the bar. He can do this, not because he's the composer and can do whatever he wants, but because the note is an harmonic suspension which simultaneously acts as an harmonic anacrusis to the next bar, and it doesn't interfere with the actual anacrusis that exists in the left hand. When we add the same mordent later on, Händel has written music which fulfills the same musical structural function, but is in fact different music entirely. Because the function of the long note is the same, then we can add the mordent without concern. It's almost even more important that we do add it, because Händel writes this only twice, once in the first half and once in the second. The accented and held fourth beat is a rarity, so we should definitely highlight it with an ornament, if it has none already. But don't forget, this is the exception to the rule. Adding in ornaments on strong beats is always easy. The difficulty is in deciding why. One thing which always helps is to find strong harmonic structural points. After a rather long series of continuous notes, we land on the dominant of F major. For me, the temptation is strong to highlight the arrival on the dominant on beat 3. A trill seems appropriate, even if it's a small one. It ends the phrase nicely, provides a nice breath between phrases, and allows us to take some time. It's also nice to know that Händel seems to ornament beat 3 quite often in this piece. So, in a sense, we're maintaining consistency, and thus our ornament doesn't seem too far out of place. If we want to go against the grain a little, we can try doing an ornament on beat 1, in one of the rare cases so far where the harmony takes a swift and unexpected turn. This is important harmonically, and we have a long note that is approached by a long jump in the right hand. The note will be automatically accented solely due to how it's written in the piece. So let's accent it even more by using the ornament that is used for hard accents, the mordent. You see, the process is a lot easier than it seems. As long as you have a reason for your ornament that can be traced to harmony, structure, or style, then you can really add in as much as you want. Students and colleagues have consulted me for many years with the question of, how do I know my ornaments will sound right? Indeed, it's a tough question, and even if you are proficient in this, there is still an element of doubt that creeps in. But really, what sounds right and what sounds wrong in Baroque ornamentation? In my view, it's a simple issue of style, and what fits in with this style and what doesn't. But it's more than that. Musical style is like much of our mechanical technology. It comes from an origin of need or necessity, and this shapes the musical requirement and execution. Why do we have trills at all? Why do composers use them? If we can figure out this question, then surely we're in a better position to decide when to add them ourselves, right? What is the primary purpose of ornamentation, and why is it so prevalent and important in keyboard music? Well, let's remember that the most common keyboard instrument in the Baroque era was most likely the harpsichord, as the organ was usually too costly to have in the house, and the clavichord, though supremely expressive, was very limited in terms of volume of sound. In addition, the harpsichord was also used as a practice instrument by organists when an organ was not available. The harpsichord could not change the volume of notes irrespective of others on the same keyboard, so the only expressive power you had was in rubato and articulation. Ornaments were a way to add in crescendi and decrescendi, to prolong notes that would decay too fast, and to accent in a way that was not necessarily hard or percussive. It's another tool, in other words, that overcame a deficiency of the instrument. This is also why it is so difficult to add ornamentation on the modern piano. We have a sonic result that is already loaded with changes in sound color, articulation, volume, and rhythm. Trills become an overload, an answer to a question that the piano does not pose or require. There are some alternatives that exist to traditional ornamentation, like mordents and trills. You have the option of filling in space rhythmically if notes happen to fit. The jump of a third is a very convenient option. Rising thirds and falling thirds present realistic options. What you're essentially doing is filling in these thirds with a middle note, changing the rhythm slightly. So instead of this, you might have something like this. And instead of this, you might have something like this. This kind of ornamentation can go even further. It is entirely possible to insert partial scales, like in this spot from the second half. Instead of this, you might have something like this. can even go so far as to mimic something that might be done more often in perhaps string playing, by inserting a whole scale. Consider the opening. Now, we can put in a few more notes if we'd like. The same approach applies here as it does with normal trills. What you're looking for is a way to add notes that either reinforce the harmony, or the rhythm, or the gesture. Anything that goes against this sounds odd and out of place. This is probably the most important point about putting in ornamentation. You have to risk having your own choices sound odd in order to understand why a particular ornament does or doesn't work. Sometimes we come across ideas that are unplanned or purely inspired in the moment. They might work, or they might fail miserably. But only by trying will we understand why something works or doesn't, even if we already know the rules of engagement. So, that's it for this episode of Ask a Pianist. Until next time, keep practicing, and start experimenting with the addition of ornamentation that comes out of nowhere. Just remember that no matter what, the harmony, rhythm, and gestures inform you of what is most important and what you need to highlight. Bye for now.